I'm George Friedman, and with me is Robert Kaplan, who is the newest member of the Stratfor team. He's joined us as Chief Geopolitical Analyst. And I want to welcome Bob and thank him for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here, George.
And we will be having these conversations quite often, I hope. And today's conversation is going to be about the geopolitics of Europe, not simply about the current crisis, but try and understand Europe as a geopolitical entity, how it works, and what its future is. So, Bob, we have spent the past year obsessed over Greece, Portugal, and all these countries with their financial crises. What's the deeper meaning of all this?
The deeper meaning is that Europe, as a concept, is a much more ambitious project than the founders of the European Union ever realized, because Europe doesn't exist so much. What we have in history and geography is a Carolinian Europe, Charlemagne's empire, which today is the Hague, it's Strasbourg, it's Maastricht. It's that spinal column of old world civilization going from the Dutch coast all the way down the western side of Germany into the Alps, which was the heart of Charlemagne's empire, and lo and behold, it's the heart of the European Union. It's where you have the treaty towns. It's where you have Brussels, which is the European Union capital. This was the real heart of Europe. Then you have Prussian Europe to the east, and then you have far, far removed through a different pattern of history and economy. You have the Balkans, which was part of the Ottoman Turkish realm, always much poorer and more weakly governed than the Habsburg and Russian and Prussian empires to the north. And then you have Mediterranean Europe in general, Italy, Spain, etc., which also had very weaker development patterns, had more oligarchies, less liberalism, and were tied to North Africa. And the European Union not only put all these different empires together, but they put them together under one currency in recent years. Now, I lived in Greece for 7 years, and 74% of Greek companies are family businesses, where there's no chance of promotion. If you're not a member of the family, there's very little meritocracy. This is not the creature just of monetary or financial policy. This is culture and geography going back hundreds upon hundreds of years. So it's really an ambitious project to put these different Europes together. And this is the real deeper geographical meaning of what's been going on.
To me, one of the interesting things is a book I read years ago. It was very popular, Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And one of the arguments he made, rightly or wrongly, was the difference between Northern Europe, where the Protestants took place, and the ethic they brought to bear, and Southern Catholic Europe, which was a very different place with a very different ethic, with France sort of tottering in between. And the point that he made was these were very different places. They approached life very differently. We have a kind of monolithic view of capitalism, that there's capitalism and non-capitalism. But there are a great variety of capitalisms.
Absolutely.
There's Japanese capitalism, which is nothing like our own.
Yes.
There's Chinese capitalism, which is like nothing else.
Yeah.
But even in Europe, the capitalism of Southern Europe, of the Balkans, of Northern Europe, of Germany, are entirely different. In Southern Europe, the family, as you point out,
is everything.
Is absolutely everything.
It's sacred. It's the heart of everything. And remember, Greece, we're not talking about Catholic Europe. We're talking about Eastern Orthodox Europe, which is closer culturally and psychologically to Moscow throughout history than it is to anywhere in Western Europe. And in fact, Eastern Orthodoxy in many ways is more similar to Islam than it is to Western Christendom, because they were both governed under similar imperial rules.
And when we take a look at the division of Europe, we call it tripartite. There is Northern Protestant Europe, there's Southern Catholic Europe, and there's Southeastern Orthodox Europe. All of these have totally different understandings of what property means, of what the obligation of the individual to the state is. What's happened in Europe is the German northern Protestant view has prevailed as a dominant view, and it's delegitimized all these other views. And when you take a look at what we've done here, is not only take different geopolitical areas, but out of that geopolitics, different cultural areas that are so deeply incompatible that fitting together doesn't work.
We'll see how it works. One thing about Greece is whenever you met someone in Athens, they often had family property in the islands or in the country, in the deep Peloponnese. And as the financial crisis unfolds, and it has really profound fundamental effects on Greek society, people may be going back to their family, back to their family plots, to their homes to try to live where it's cheaper, and reconstitute things. What we've kind of missed, though some of the major newspapers have done good features on it, is the profound shifts going on in Greek society now, where you're going to have real poverty at the end of 2012, where you have where you may have a rediscovery of orthodoxy. In a way. You may even have populist right-wing movements, not just in Greece. We've seen it in Hungary. We've seen it, we may see it in Italy and other places. I was just in Hungary for the first time in years, George, and it's a very unhappy place. It really devastated me compared to my previous visits there. Restaurants were empty on a Friday night. People are really suffering.
Well, as someone born in Hungary, I can say that Hungarians and unhappiness go together, and they do it quite well. But the important thing to bear in mind is that there are forces emerging in Europe now that we thought were submerged forever, that the founders of Europe thought they had submerged. The right wing, the religiosity, the poverty,
yes,
the family, that in this process, you're also going to see a reemergence of nationalism.
Yes, but it's going to be it's going to be a nationalism with an asterisk, George, because what you're not seeing is a rise in defense budgets, the reconstitution of ground forces. Europe has been sufficiently, I think, de-Bellicized in that sense, into a quasi-pacifistic realm, so that armies are, European countries look at their soldiers as civil servants in funny uniforms, not as fighters. So it's a different kind of nationalism.
I agree with you now. I don't think that'll last. I think you can't have the kind of tensions that you have developing in Europe and permanently maintain a kind of pacifism. I think the pacifism that emerged out of First World War and the Second World War, being appalled utterly at what has happened, is a very real force in Europe. At the same time, the tensions in Europe are sufficiently substantial. The distrust that's going is sufficiently real that over time, the unnatural pacifism of Europe may well change. So
Germany will be a place to watch it, because Germany has gone into real uber pacifism in a way, and yet it's uneasily located between East and West, facing towards Russia, needing Russia for its natural gas, etc. As the decades continue onward away from the Second World War, and Germany becomes more of a normal country in the way that it looks towards its military, the way Japan is, in a way, we may see, I wouldn't say a reemergence of German nationalism, because that has a bad connotation, but a more normal Germany.
I think we can distinguish between fascism and a normal country with a normal self-interest.
Yes.
Even that would be a radical change for Europe.
Yeah.
But that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, as the European project strains and the transnational vision of Europe strains, we're seeing the reemergence of national interest, and that has a logic to it.
Also, what we have to take into account is North Africa. Because remember, Ferdinand Braudel, in his great book, The Mediterranean and the World of Philip II, always said that Europe's border does not stop at the Mediterranean. Its real southern border is the Sahara Desert. That North Africa, the North African coast from Morocco to Egypt, was very much a part of Europe, and the map of the Roman Empire certainly shows that. Now that North African countries are in their own unwieldy, messy way gradually starting to move away from one-man thugocracies and dictatorships, we may see North Africa added to the mix of all these tensions we've been talking about.
The French are already talking about a Mediterranean free trade zone.
Yes.
But also remember that we've also seen the first encounter since Algeria, in a way, between Europe and North Africa in Libya.
Right. Yes.
And it was a military event, and it was an important event. And it was not an event by NATO per se. Most of the NATO countries didn't participate. It was two Mediterranean powers, Italy and France, supported by the United States, getting involved. And this is one of the reasons why I'm not nearly as sanguine that the military aspect of Europe has been abolished in perpetuity. Certainly for this generation, possibly for the next. Anyway, I'd like to thank you, and thank you for our first.
My pleasure, George.
Joint membership in Stratfor and first conversation. And we look forward to having many, many more on many, many obscure and interesting topics. And for Bob Kaplan, Robert Kaplan, and myself, thank you.
Thank you.